So how does the EU control language and thought right across the bloc? Welcome to the MCC Brussels YouTube channel. We're here in the belly of the beast in the European Parliament, and I'm delighted to be joined by, firstly, my colleague Norman Lewis, who, if you follow our channel, you know has just written a really wonderful new publication for us called Manufacturing Misinformation. But I'm also delighted to be joined by three rare people, who are rare because they're MEPs who are doing an awful lot of work to fight against lots of the trends that we on our YouTube channel and in our work spend time addressing. So sitting closest to me here, we have Tom van den Driessen, MEP. We got Nicola Bartulica over here and Virginie Geron, MEP. As you'll notice, we've got a mix of MEPs, some from the Patriots, some from the ECR, because in this issue, when it comes to controlling speech, we would like to think it's not actually a party political position, free speech, although sadly it really has become one, and certainly there are lots of other people in this building who will probably be looking over our shoulders who would very much like that we didn't have a discussion on free speech and
if you hear
debate.
A beep, they are censoring, eh?
Yeah, and then there are probably some fact checkers as well who are going to creep in at some point. But to kick us off, one of the things, we just had a discussion in the European Parliament, really well-attended discussion on how we can fight the kind of weird confluence of the European Commission, supportive NGOs, activists and academics, and how we can make a dent in that. But at the heart of it really is this piece of legislation, the DSA, the Digital Services Act. And Norman is our kind of resident expert on this horrible piece of legislation. So I thought I'd just ask Norman briefly to explain, what is the DSA and what does it do to regulate speech in Europe?
Well, the DSA, Digital Services Act, is a wonderful piece of EU newspeak because it's a law that appears to be concerned about the delivery of a service, which is speech. It makes out that speech in Europe is like the delivery of water or electricity. It's a service, not a right, not a political right. And essentially the law was passed as a means through which the Commission sets what can and cannot be said online. That's essentially what, so it actually should be called the Digital Speech Act, or more particularly has now become the Digital Surveillance Act, where big tech is now regulated to the point that if any piece of text content is posted on there which is regarded as hate speech or disinformation, which of course begs the question of who defines what those things are, they have to take it down. And if they don't, they can be fined like 8% of their global revenue, which in most cases will be probably bigger than the revenues they earn in Europe. And basically it's a law that gives the Commission the power to dictate what big tech can and cannot say. So it's a law against free speech, essentially. Yeah,
and Virginie, it's not just about what happens online in the sense that you might get a Facebook post removed or a Twitter post removed or something. It also has an increasing role in shaping elections, like real, like kind of big political events. Yeah.
That is a very good point that you make in front of them, because normally it was a regulation about services, as you mentioned it, and also about free speech. And at the end, because you have a little two words inside this regulation, it's Article 34.c. And you have just two little words. It's about the regulation from the platform, and the words are process electoral, or electoral process. And with these two words, now, because when we wrote this regulation, because I was in this IMCO committee.
So we blame you.
No, it's not my fault, sorry. It's not my fault. But we make a mistake, because it's true. We have like 50 pages on this regulation, but nobody spoke about this topic, important topic, election, democracy. Nobody between us, between all these different MEP, we have debates on these two words, keywords. And now, since this regulation, we discover these guidelines. These guidelines is what? From the DSA election toolkit. When we wrote this regulation, as I said, we didn't have a debate, because now it's mean all these platforms have to follow this toolkit. It means they have to control during election, before the election, during the election, and after the election, what the people says, or even some politician guy can promote, can speak, and can share during the election. I think it's not right to the Commission to make like an interference during the election, because now they impose to these different platforms this process. But without debates, without transparency, because I asked the Commission for, since, you know, everybody knows, since the cancellation in election in Romania, because they pretend that the fault came from TikTok. Yeah. And I asked the Commission, okay, why not? But we want to know your agenda, because we knew during an audition, during an hearing, that some people from the Commission came to Romania to impose this to the platform. And I asked the Commission, because normally you have the big value is transparency. And me, I asked the Commission, I want to see the agenda, I want to see the resume of these meetings to see what's happened during this election agenda, because it's important for the citizen to know what kind of power has this Commission.
Yeah, well, and actually, at MCC Brussels, we put in a request with the European Ombudsman, which is still ongoing, about precisely this issue, about exactly. And they won't release any of the information on it. But Stephen, one of the things Virginia got at was that you can pass laws in the European Union, and then before you know it, the Commission adds 20 yes. pages of guidance to it. Is this a kind of typical way in which the agenda gets slowly inched forward by the Commission?
Well, yes. I don't know how much your viewers are aware of the bureaucracy, the permanent bureaucracy in Brussels. I think it numbers at least 20,000 civil servants, and many of them probably don't have much to do. So there is this tendency to hyper-regulate everything, not just speech, but in the economy. We see that Europe is suffocating its own industry and causing harm because we're not an island. We interact with other players in the global economy. And what I see in many areas, Europe is falling behind because of this hyper-regulation. Now, with speech, it's a fundamental issue because we don't have a functioning free society or democracy without freedom of speech. They prefer, obviously, here, regulated or controlled speech. They don't like surprise outcomes in elections, and they take action, obviously, when they don't like surprise outcomes, like Virginia mentioned in Romania, but also there's the increasing weaponization of the judiciary. So generally, I would say in this day and age, we're living in a time where everything is becoming highly politicized, from the judiciary to social media, and it's not good. It's not good. In principle, it's not possible to monitor and supervise the public square, but obviously the people here who feel that they're the anointed ones, they're meant to rule over everyone else. They feel this is their God-given right. And what really underlies this is a contempt for the ordinary person. So I, as a newly elected MEP from Croatia, was sent here by my voters to really fight for their interests on a daily basis. And it's not easy in this city because there's so much deal-making and decision-making behind closed doors. It's very non-transparent, and in the end, we must say that there's no system of checks and balances. It's nearly impossible to hold the Commission accountable. That's why I'm very skeptical about the possibilities to make any progress with the DSA. In principle, it's a bad piece of legislation which will probably just get worse.
Yeah, and Tom, one of the things that we hear a lot when it comes to the DSA and other associated legislation is that it's about keeping the role of big tech in check. So they say that, oh, we've got these big tech platforms, they need to be properly regulated. But actually, the DSA hands a huge amount of power to these big tech platforms to decide what can and can't be posted.
Yes, well, the situation beforehand was that big tech platforms had a users agreement and could basically determine whatever they wanted. This is not a situation which is favorable for the exercise of citizens' rights. We have seen before DSA that there was also a lot of censorship, for example, on Meta, on Instagram, on Twitter, and so on. Now, what they actually did, as the European Commission cannot censor itself, they have basically outsourced the censorship to the big tech companies. And it's kind of a mafia-style blackmail, because if you don't apply the rules they impose on the big tech companies, then they get fined. So I think it's a mafia-style operation, basically.
Yeah, and Norman, yeah, one of the things I wanted to sketch out is we hear a lot that there's a huge problem with disinformation, misinformation, hate speech online, and that's been kind of the driving impetus for why we have to have a DSA or other associated regulations. But as you've sketched out in some of your work, lots of that narrative is actually directly funded by the European institutions.
Yeah, well, I suppose the real question is who decides? Who determines what's disinformation or hate speech? And you know, if just to slightly go back on the DSA itself, because I think there's a really important point to make, which is that if we trace the origins of it, which is really in the 2016 Code of Conduct, and that was brought in, by the way, not through Parliament, it was done outside of Parliament. It was an agreement between the Commission and big tech, basically to censor, to control speech, and that was a consequence of Brexit and Trump's election. Yeah. And the panic then was, and I think, Stephen, you made a really good point, which is against the unpredictability of free speech. You know, it's the energy of free speech that they are petrified of, precisely because they are very scared of the people. Yes. They're very scared that the people, you know, they would like to believe that the people are not independent, you know, don't have agency. They're just these thick, you know, impressionable idiots who will be swayed by a Russian bot or a Chinese bot, you know, like the farmers, you know. Like thinking. The farmers didn't have any grievances. Yes. You know, the only reason why they came out in the streets was because they were instructed.
Someone was manipulating them.
By the Kremlin. You know, the Kremlin was... Anyway, the point is that the DSA was really about making the unpredictable predictable.
Exactly.
You know, that's really what the law was about. And the 2016 Code of Conduct, which is what the DSA is based upon, was an agreement that they had with all the... And in a previous report that I wrote, I showed the amount of stuff that was taken down as a result of the Code of Conduct, which everybody bought into. And by the way, the Code of Conduct, which then got broken by Thierry Breton when he made this deal with, or tried to make a deal with Musk. You know, everybody's forgotten that. You know, and Musk came out and said, no, the quid pro quo was, if you censor stuff during the election, we won't fine you. And Musk said, well, thank you very much, but I'm not going to participate in it. But what people didn't say was that Google and Meta, Facebook, had the same agreement. They didn't come out against it. So in other words, there was the censorship that was going on, and no one knew anything about it. But Musk exposed that, you know, quite correctly. And really what he's showing is that, you know, they decide hate speech or whatever. The real hatred here is for the electorate. I mean, that's really what this is about.
No, mafia style, as Tom said, isn't it, Virginia?
I totally agree with my colleagues, Tom and you, Dr. Norman, because it's true. That's the example. The best example is the result from a Romanian election. The Călin Georgescu wasn't on a head of the Brussels. That's the reason they can't sell this election to use TikTok platform. It's crazy. And also, the thing is, they use this tool, DSA, exactly to ban, to censor some political view different. Because another point, because here in Brussels, they are thinking they are another planet. They are thinking that since 40 years, they did the best for the people. That's the point. They don't think 1 minute that they did bad things, bad strategy. You look, one example, automotive industry. They kill totally this industry. But today, they don't think it was a wrong decision to make a Green Deal. they're thinking they did the best for the citizen. And they can understand that the people now criticize all this strategy. Also, when you spoke about wokeism, for them here it's a religion. And if you criticize this, they're thinking that it's a hate speech. It's not a hate speech. We can share another point of view. But in the head of Brussels, of this commission, also from the majority of this parliamentarian here, they are thinking they did the best. Brussels are like the best bureaucracy in the world, and they want also to make this bureaucracy all over the world, because I'm sure you too, when you go outside the European Parliament, because we are in a different delegation. I went to Japan the last week, and they want to impose this model to Japan. It's true, because they are thinking they did a good job since 40 years. And that's the problem. If you criticize this, DSA are there to say, no, you are not right, it's disinformation, it's misinformation, and the platform has to censor this.
Yeah, it's a great irony, isn't it, that this censorship legislation is a response to all of the problems that have grown up as a result of EU policy.
Yes, I mean, I would say I've served here for almost a year. Frankly, it's broken, and it's difficult to imagine how to fix the institutions as they are now. There's no, with the hearings for incoming commissioners, for example, everything was decided in advance. It was pure theater. There was no real suspense or unpredictability about the whole process. And so it was basically a 3-hour exercise acting out your part, so to speak. And so, like I said, there's no real checks and balances in this city, despite what people think of President Trump in the United States. There you have, real checks and balances, real, I would say, vibrant, hostile media. Whereas here in Europe, you have more or less journalists acting as propagandists for people in power. There's no willingness to speak back, to challenge authority, political authority, and I think citizens see this. They see this. That's why the mainstream media is losing its influence. Young people are not paying any attention to these journalists and legacy media outlets, and that's a chance, obviously, for conservatives, national conservatives, who I know in Croatia. My following is growing among young people especially. So this is what concerns people here. They're not communicating, obviously, with this next generation and addressing their needs. And so the EU is, as I said, in a kind of permanent crisis, but what I see now since these recent elections, doubling down. Instead of sobering up and asking difficult questions, the elites are doubling down, and so we're going to have a real fight on our hands.
Yeah,
if I may add some elements, where does this come from, this war on freedom of speech? It's basically because their policies are not working, and everybody can see that it's not working. Their migration pact is not working to protect our borders. Their Green Deal policies is leading to desindustrialization and the loss of purchasing power and competitiveness in Europe. And yet the only solution for this globalist elite here in the European Parliament is always more European Union. The solution is always more, not less. While in normal democracies, well, if the citizens get the right to vote, then they have a right to enter into dialogue about policies, and then policies can be adjusted. It can go in another direction, but this is clearly not the intention of these super democrats here in the European Parliament.
That's right.
I mean, that's why what they're so good at is regulation. This is quite an important point about digital sovereignty, because when you think about it, and what has Europe got? It's got hardly any startups in AI. It's in big tech companies, doesn't exist. Infrastructure, the cloud, completely lost that battle. you know, Europe does not have technological sovereignty. So the only thing they've got is digital sovereignty, which is they control the market. They control access to the markets, which is why they are so hell-bent on, you know, regulating.
That's
and
right.
so this came up in the discussion today. There's the impetus is the opposite to what people are thinking. That, you know, now that J.D. Vance has come out and said, you know, Europe's got a free speech problem. You know, you think they would think, okay, well, maybe we should think about the opposite is what's happening.
Yes.
You know, if you saw that debate that took place in Parliament, it was like, why aren't you doing this? And then the commissioner gets up and says, well, we're increasing our headcount by 10,000. You know, in other words, we're going to go more on this because that's all they've got. You know, they haven't got the technology to compete. So they're going to try and control this. It's on like free speech. They're trying to control outcomes rather than determining or allowing these things to happen.
And Virginia, that's what the Democracy Shield is about as well, right? Could you tell us, just for our viewers, like what is the Democracy Shield and how does it fit into this kind of controlling puzzle that the EU?
Democracy bunker.
I think it's the last tool that they want to use to try to win this kind of war. Because they use NGOs, they use now DSA, and they are losing also the power. Because each election, they are losing some seats. And this special committee, it was created because Mrs. von der Leyen wanted it. Because for her, it was very important to fight not climate change, not poverty, but to protect democracy. It means to protect power as power. And now with this special committee, now we have the draft. And the draft it was, they want to create a structure independent, I don't believe in that, independent. This structure will be control all the platforms, all the media mainstream, and they want, because it's wrote in this draft, to educate the young people to the information. And they want also to fight all the strategy who could ban or the EU principle that the Brussels want to promote. Yeah. It's wrote in this draft. It's clear because we spoke about disinformation inside this regulation DSA. Why not? Disinformation, it's open at everything. Misinformation also, but now it's clear. Also, if you criticize all the value that the EU promotes, like wokeism, all this gender equality, no borders, new member states like Moldavia, Ukraine inside this new UE, they have the right to fight you. And it's wrote in this draft, and they want to do that, to create this structure that it will be, for me, in French, it's a bras armé. Or, as you said this morning, Ministry of Vérité. And you said Minister of Vérité, you need a structure for this. And it will be the end of this commission.
Yeah, and it's easy to overdo, especially when talking about the EU. It's always, you want to reach for metaphors about communism, Stephen. But in this case, the structural similarity is very clear that you have an increasingly out-of-touch elite, and the only way that they can maintain their power is by further clamping down on what can and can't be said and creating a kind of farcical parody version of democracy that is kind of like the fake thing that people can do.
Yes. They're in denial for sure. There's many things in common. The one difference that's a disadvantage for us is that there is still material prosperity in Europe. With the old communist world, you know, people were deprived of so much for so long, and they wanted finally to bring down the wall. But one must say that in 1989, when communism collapsed, thankfully, in Europe, the elites were taken by surprise. No one was expecting this. This was something that was not foreseen by the analysts sitting here or in Washington, for that matter. I would say without the leadership of John Paul II and his first visit to Poland as elected Pope in 1979, this is when, metaphorically speaking, the Polish people began to take off the chains of communism and lose the fear of the system. And what we have to say today is that by speaking out and exposing what's happening, we will encourage many people. We may never meet, but we'll see, what's happening, and we'll take action, hopefully, and we'll bring an end to this kind of soft tyranny. I think it's not an overstatement to say what we have is a soft form of totalitarianism already in the European Union. If they're willing to ban people from running for high office or to cancel elections, then we're not really in a free society anymore. And they're not even concealing what they're doing. It's out in the open, which actually is a good thing. They're being forced to do this out in the open. And so the communists were able to retain power for far too long, using obviously different methods. They had everything more or less under their control, including the military and the police. Here we're fighting a kind of a different enemy, but the instinct is the same. The instinct to censor speech, to crush dissent. This is the totalitarian impulse, which is, I would say, eternal, and we as conservatives must fight back, expose this while we still can, and take encouragement from the heroes of Central and Eastern Europe. Much of the strength in Europe today comes, ironically, from these countries who suffered so much under communism, and they don't take freedom for granted. I know in Croatia we don't. And so I think there is certainly hope still, and we just saw in the recent elections in Poland, the whole establishment, entire Brussels machine, the media were against Nawrocki, and he prevailed.
Yeah,
that's actually an interesting point, this comparison with the fortunate downfall of communism. Because back then the intimidation of the state was quite rough and rude. You could get sent to the gulag, or while now it's more subtle. You can lose your job, or your social reputation gets slandered or something like that. But in the end, the mechanism is the same. When a few weeks before the German wall came down in Berlin, the anti-fascist protection wall, by the way, was it the official name? So they needed to protect themselves from fascism by locking people up in a like big prison. So it's fascinating. But the interesting thing is, some weeks before they celebrated 40 years, I think, of German Democratic Republic, was it called? 40 years. And there were tens of thousands of students and young people, the Red Youth, were waving flags in the streets of Berlin, and everybody thought, well, we're up for another 40 years. And only a few weeks later, everybody just went down the streets and the wall came down. And I think this is the totalitarian and authoritarian aspect of these kind of regimes, whether it's in communist or socialist regimes, or now in liberal regimes that we have, is that actually nobody was a communist, but everybody pretended to be one. And it's exactly the same now. Everybody pretends to believe in this so-called liberal European values of gender ideology, woke, anti-racism, but it's all rubbish because nobody actually believes in it. And it only needs like a trigger, a spark, and then the whole system comes down. And this is interesting because the liberal values, I always thought that liberal values were about the promotion of civil rights, were about the defense of freedom of speech. Exactly the same people like Guy Verhofstadt, you all know this guy, exactly this one, he abolished my party when he was prime minister, and we were the first opposition party. These same guys are inventing the DSA, are putting down the freedom of speech and so on. So it's like eventually, I think, reality kicks in and people will make the right choices.
That, I think, is a very useful note to end on. I want to urge our viewers, if you're being introduced to some of the people around the table for the first time, make sure you're following them on social media and following the great work that they're doing in the Parliament. But I'm sure you'll see them certainly on our podcast, and you'll see them, I'm sure, elsewhere in the very near future. But I wanted to thank Virginie, Norman, Tom, Stephen. Great discussion, and thanks also for your time today. But thanks so much.
Thank you.